What is going on? Happy Tuesday. Happy Tuesday morning, afternoon, depending on where you're tuning in from. My name is Ryan Hammer here with FanDuel, and we are with the man, the myth, the legend. Again, Jon Rothstein.
Easy.
Welcome back, sir. How are you?
I'm great, brother. How you doing?
I'm good. I know you're better now after your experiences right before the NCAA tournament, the first day getting from Albany to New York City, but the Albany staff helped you out, right?
They helped me out. It was the epitome of brutality. Thanks to Dwayne Killings, the head coach of Albany. Shout out to the Great Danes for getting me back for the start of Michigan and Colorado State. Again, you think that things are going to be really, really bad. You think it's worse than losing a bye game, and it's the epitome of brutality. You don't know anything until you're sitting on a tarmac and you're stranded and you're helpless and you can't get to a TV and you can't get back to New York City.
It's honestly a shame that people don't know who David Roddy is sitting next to you. Like it's crazy that people don't know who he is and going into the tournament, but it kind of is what it is. It's the life we live.
It is what it is, man. It is what it is. But that problem's in the rearview mirror, and now we look forward through the windshield to the Sweet 16, and what a Sweet 16 it should be.
Oh yeah, precisely. It's gonna be awesome. We've had a ton of upsets, ton of great storylines out of the tournament. I want to start with you out of what you pegged as the region of vulnerability out of the bottom right with Iowa, Richmond. We go to the Midwest, the Kansas, right? Let's go to the bottom of the region first. I think we talked about how Wisco and Auburn, like maybe they could get an easy path out, but they're not. Right. They're probably the weaker of the 2 and 3 seeds. How these teams got out? Any major things that you saw from the weekend and big takeaways from it?
Well, we start in the region of vulnerability. You know, Iowa State's offense is offensive, but its defense is elite. You know, I mean, you don't see many teams able to advance to the Sweet 16 when they only average about 56.5 points per game. But Iowa State was able to do that. You know, I thought they played an LSU team that, again, was a team without a compass because Will Wade, its head coach, was fired right before the NCAA tournament. Then you look at, obviously, Miami. I liked Miami in this tournament. You know, I thought it was a 50-50 game against USC, but I thought the guard play of Miami would put them in a situation to potentially advance. We saw, obviously, that guard play shine. And, you know, I am a big fan of the Rocky series. And I remember in Rocky 3 when Apollo Creed was trying to get Rocky ready to fight Clubber Lang, he told him the way to get it back is to go back to the beginning. When you look at Miami under Jim Larrañaga, when this program has really had success and had success at the beginning of his tenure, they did it by blending quality high school players with transfers. And they got away from that the last couple of years and recruited guys like DeJuan Huell and Bruce Brown and Lonnie Walker. Miami has now gotten back to its original fabric. And think about this. 3 Sweet 16 appearances for Miami under Larrañaga, 2013, 2016, 2022. The common trait and the common thread in all of those, at least 2 of the team's top 4 scorers have been transfers.
I think we talked about transfer before the tournament, also like across the board have been awesome. And then I think we were really keen to see how they'd perform in the tournament. And I think, as to your point, transfers have been huge this season with the COVID year, the extra year eligibility have been awesome. This game, Iowa State, Miami, just like you said, like they couldn't be 2 more, maybe not completely opposite teams because Iowa State relies on a couple guards as well. But Miami runs at a fast pace. They run the score up, and Iowa State likes to control the pace and slow the game down. Do you think Brockington, Tyrese Hunter, and do you think Iowa State's defense can slow down Miami's offense and the guards?
It's a great contrast in styles. It's a contrast in styles. I think that's really, really fascinating on a number of different levels. I mean, look, I think if Miami can get to 60 points, they're winning the game and they're playing in the Elite Eight. And then you look at this region, and I named it the region of vulnerability for, you know, a reason. Kansas needed everything it had to beat a Creighton team that didn't have Ryan Kalkbrenner, that didn't have, obviously, Ryan Nembhard, who broke his wrist, you know, a couple of weeks ago, the Big East Freshman of the Year. It needed everything it had to beat Creighton. I think Providence has an outstanding chance, as good a chance as you can have, to get to an Elite Eight. And then if they get to an Elite Eight, they're playing either an 11 or a 10 to get to a Final Four. So I think that if the game right now, and they're playing with house money, and I wrote about that in my daily column today, The Breakfast Buffet, they're playing with house money. But I do think that if Providence can get by Kansas, you know, it's got an outstanding chance to get to a Final Four.
Yeah, and this was probably one of the upset. Like we talked about the Jackrabbits, South Dakota State in the first round. I know you were on them. I was on them. Most of the country was probably on them for a big upset, 13-4 in the first round. And after Providence took care of business and absolutely dismantled Richmond and really, really took care of business there, if they can get past Kansas, like you said, like they're going to be proving some haters wrong. Maybe people will still say their run was relatively easy, but if they beat Kansas and go to the Final Four, there's nothing you can say other than Ed Cooley and their team is deserving. And maybe we did overlook them throughout the season a little bit.
The American dream, Ed Cooley. What more could you want from this basketball team? And again, you're playing Kansas, but it's a vulnerable Kansas team in Chicago. So I would expect a lot of Providence fans are going to be eating deep dish here over the next couple of days.
Exactly. So we'll see what happens out of that region, but we'll go up to the last game of the weekend, and probably one of the best, if not the best, Arizona versus TCU. When I thought I was going to be able to go to sleep early one night, I don't know about yourself, and then TCU made a comeback, and all of a sudden I'm watching overtime until 12:30, 1 o'clock in the morning on the East Coast here. But that region looks awesome. I think Michigan has proven that their talent, maybe they still have that talent, they've revitalized, and they're not really an 11 seed. They're not playing like one at all after just beating Tennessee. And you got 4 really, really good teams potentially coming out of the South here, right?
Yeah, I mean, I've named this the region of prospects, and you looked at the region of prospects, and you saw obviously what Hunter Dickinson did against Tennessee. You saw what Ben Mathurin did against Houston, or against TCU. I have said time and time again that Ben Mathurin was going to explode like a volcano in the NCAA tournament, and Ben Mathurin really made America feel the lava the other night against TCU. I mean, the shot that he hit to tie the game in regulation at 75 was an all-time NCAA tournament shot. But now you don't really get ready for a Sweet 16 game against Houston. You're getting ready for a fight. So I'm fascinated. This, to me, when I look at the totality of all 4 regions, this is the best doubleheader in the Sweet 16 when you're looking at one site.
Yeah, 100%. I think the Michigan-Villanova game is going to be close no matter what. I think it's a 5-point spread right now, but Michigan, like we said, is not playing up to the caliber in 11. It's just not an 11 versus 2. This is an even game as you can get. Villanova, I think experience is carrying them more than anything else. They obviously have a good team in Jay Wright, Fortune 500, of course. But when Ohio State took shots and maybe hit a couple jabs at them, Villanova kept stretching the lead out. They never really let them get too close or take the lead from them. And I think that could propel them far against a team like Arizona with a first-time head coach, a first-year head coach, a lot of sophomores who didn't get a lot of PT last year. And then you look at guys like teams like Michigan and Houston who do have the experience as well. How do you think the inexperience from Arizona versus the experienced teams they'll have to play against in the South will kind of face up there?
Well, I think that Villanova has an edge in terms of experience just because of Colin Gillespie at the most important position on the floor. I don't know if Houston has enough offense to counter Arizona. Houston's going to have to make this game into an ultimate fighting type situation. I mean, I think, you're going to have to put this game into the octagon or whatever. So I look at the scenario with that, and I think, Houston's going to have to generate enough offense. They're going to have a big game out of Tajay Moore, who's been incredible.
Yep.
But, we'll see from there. I like Villanova and Arizona to advance, and then I think we've got a tremendous, tremendous regional final. But to me, the most intriguing game out of this region is Arizona against Houston, because you have a team that's been decimated by injuries, but is not decimated on heart by any stretch of the imagination, against a team in Arizona that I would say, again, has the highest ceiling right now left in the tournament.
Yep, I think that's fair. And I guess we'll see how that matches up. I think the athletic and versatility of the defense of Houston does match up well against Arizona, because we saw behind Mathurin and Christian Koloko, you need physical dominance to compete with them. But we'll see. No, I don't think any first-time head coach has made it to the Final Four since about 89 or 90. We'll see if Tommy Lloyd in Arizona can do that, can be the first in the last 20 or 30 years. Then we'll go over to the West, to Gonzaga, the overall favorite. They had a very good game versus Memphis. I think everyone wanted to watch the Chet versus Jalen Duren matchup. Just the athleticism on Memphis. And then we get Arkansas, Texas Tech, and Duke chalked up into the Sweet 16, the 1-4. But I think a lot of people kind of saw that coming for the most part. Who do we like besides Gonzaga? Let's start with ahead of Gonzaga in the West.
Well, Gonzaga, Arkansas, an interesting game. I obviously give us the edge to Gonzaga. I think Andrew Nembhard is playing at an extremely high level right now. You saw that against Memphis. Texas Tech and Duke is a fascinating contrast, because you've got the older, more experienced, the tougher team in Texas Tech against a team that is brimming with 5-star prospects in Duke. And even though Texas Tech is extremely physical, even though the Texas Tech is extremely older than Duke, I'm still taking the Blue Devils in this game because of the emergence of Mark Williams. Mark Williams has blocked 10 shots in the first 2 NCAA tournament games that Duke has played. He's averaging about 15 points, 7.5 rebounds, 5 blocks through the first 2 games of the tournament. You are looking at somebody, again, who I think can change the ceiling for the Blue Devils. I see a Duke-Gonzaga rematch here. And again, I think that we're going to see, at least for one more round, the Mike Krzyzewski retirement tour take us. And look, this is really, really down the road, and I don't know if it's going to happen. But there is a chance, just based on momentum, I'm not saying it's going to happen, that if you look at the left side of your bracket, we could see in Coach K's final season a Duke North Carolina national semifinal, which would be absolutely incredible.
Between that and also if they had to play Gonzaga, a rematch of the game from earlier in the year and all the star-studded power and two of the best teams coming into the season, if they had to play Gonzaga and then North Carolina, I mean, and then they ended up winning the national title, that is something you make a movie about for Coach K in his last year. But I guess we'll see if that happens. I think Texas Tech does poise a really, really good matchup against them. I think Texas Tech is favored by 1 point right now, so it's basically even. But like you said, Mark Williams has been huge at anchor. Texas Tech smashing the board has been massive for them. I think Kevin O'Banner had 12 or 13 rebounds per game in the first couple games. But we'll see how that matches up well. Arkansas, we like Arkansas. They played 2 double digits to get to where they are. It's obviously going to be tough against Gonzaga, but Eric Musselman, 2 back-to-back Sweet 16s. We'll see if he can get further than that. Down to the east, like you mentioned, North Carolina. Then let's talk about the North Carolina-Baylor game at first, because to me, that was my personal favorite game of the weekend. Maybe because I was rooting for Baylor and they had the 25-point comeback and I was so excited. But it was awesome. I think it had everything. Were there a lot of missed calls by referees and mishaps like that? Yes, but definitely want to hear your thoughts on that game.
North Carolina Baylor was one of the wilder games that I've seen the past couple of years in the NCAA tournament. But again, it goes back to me. The theme is Brady Manick. And I know that he got ejected from the game, but the change in North Carolina's season has occurred when Brady Manick has been a guy who has been, a regular all-ACC caliber player. I mean, Ryan, think about this. This season, when North Carolina gets double-figure contributions from Brady Manick, the Tar Heels are 22-4. And then you look at the other side of that region, and you have no bigger David and Goliath matchup than Purdue against St. Peter's. This is a rematch of the 2011 NCAA tournament when Purdue beat the Peacocks when they were coached by John Dunn. But Purdue now, who is in a Final Four or bust type scenario and have been really since this team all decided to come back, Purdue's a team that you look at and you see them and you say, wow, they're a team that, you kind of look at and they say, Kentucky's gone, Baylor's gone. We know that things are aligned for us to go to a Final Four. This is as good of a chance as Matt Painter has had to go to a Final Four.
And they have St. Peter's, the darling Cinderella Peacocks of Jersey City, New Jersey out here. I mean, it was awesome to watch them. It's one of the better Cinderellas I can remember. The third 15 seed to go to the Sweet 16, second in a row after Oral Roberts and Max Asmus last year. To me, like St. Peter's with their zone, it's just like with Shaheen Holloway, what he has there, their system, their scheme that they have in place. They're one of the better Cinderellas I can remember in recent times since teams like VCU, Loyola, Florida Gulf Coast, because they're so well set up. They're not just riding a hot hand of a Max Asmus or something like that to get to where they are. Do you think, what is your chances? If you have to give a percent chance, St. Peter's to beat Purdue, because I think it's definitely.
I'm not doing that. I'm not doing that because I didn't think that St. Peter's was going to win the MAC conference tournament. So I'm not doing that. I'm not going to do that. I look at this now, and I'll say this: St. Peter's is probably, if they win this next game, the most unlikely Elite Eight participant in the history of the NCAA tournament.
Oh, yeah.
And I think that's one thing that, we need to kind of take into consideration, because there's been other 15 seeds that have reached the Sweet 16. So let's make that clear. I mean, last year we saw it with Oral Roberts, but Oral Roberts had Max Asmus. So it had a dynamic scorer to lean on that was obviously a household name. And Florida Gulf Coast in 2013, when it advanced this far under Andy Enfield, you have to remember, it's a lot easier to recruit to Fort Myers, Florida, than it is to Jersey City, New Jersey, and the limitations that surround St. Peter's. So if St. Peter's wins this next game, they will be the least likely participant in the Elite Eight in the history of the NCAA tournament.
Yeah, and I think most of the nation is on St. Peter's side. The Peacocks, I think we all want to see it. Because no one wants to root against Cinderella, no matter your fandom, the brackets. I think everyone's on that, unless you're a Purdue fan, obviously. But if you had to choose someone to come out of this bracket, who would you choose out of the East?
I would take Purdue.
That's fair.
I would take Purdue. I mean, the UCLA Carolina. Look, UCLA is a little bit of a forgotten team here. They went to the Final Four last year, nearly beat Gonzaga. They have 5 starters back. We've got to find out, Jaime Jaquez's situation and so on and so forth. He's dealt with ankle injuries before. I mean, UCLA Carolina is a all-time, NCAA tournament game, because we're going to have 2 great brands going against each other in the Sweet 16. UCLA is going to have to do a really, really good job, obviously, on Armando Bacot and Brady Manick to win this game. UCLA as a team, though, again, that was fortunate to beat Akron, and then I thought played a really, really good final 30 or 35 minutes against St. Mary's. So we'll see what the Bruins have in store here on Friday night in Philadelphia.
Yeah, and I think Hawkes practiced a little bit yesterday. He worked out, so hopefully he's going to be okay. I find it unlikely that he doesn't play if there's any little if he can play at all, he's going to play. I think 100%. But I guess we'll see with that. But what they say about UCLA, their first game against Akron, like you mentioned, if you can't win, you're in your worst performance. You're not going to win the tournament. But they did, and they survived in advance. And that was about. They really took care of business with St. Mary's, and I think you're right. I think they're kind of forgotten with the experience and plethora of scorers that they have, tournament experience from last year. Mick Cronin's going to have them set up. If they win this game, that's my pick to come out of the region for the record East. I'm going to take UCLA. I think this UCLA North Carolina game is going to be awesome. Like you said, probably one of the better ones, maybe behind Arizona Houston in a couple of games in the Sweet 16. But I'm really, really excited. And for me, this has been the best region from the start, top to bottom. They have so many lower seeds and high seeds all around that are good. Here we are with St. Peter's, obviously. I also am with you. I thought Monmouth was going to win that final too before I had Iona, so that kind of is what it is. Are there any other major storylines from the first weekend that you want to share about, you want to share your thoughts about, anything that you were really, really keeping an eye on?
Yeah, it's interesting. You look and you reflect right now on so many different things. I thought that UConn late in the season was like a dark horse Final Four team. I thought that was a massive, massive upset. Chris Jans is going to be the head coach of Mississippi State, whether or not he won that game or not. But obviously a great moment for him. I think that, and I know people are probably not really looking forward to the 22-23 season yet, but I am. But if TCU can keep their nucleus together, that's a team that I think will start next season in the top 15 and be a potential contender for a Big 12 regular season title. Great respect for Kelvin Sampson in Houston. I think that I would say that, and I've said this and I've tweeted it and I've said it on television, if I could pick one coach to lead a program and to build a program if all resources were equal, I would pick Kelvin Sampson over any other coach in college basketball. And I think you're seeing that more and more. And look, if they can be a player in this, Sweet 16 and get to an Elite Eight without Marcus Sasser and Tremont Mark, I think it further cements his legacy. And, it looks at the job that he's done at Houston. That Houston was losing games by 30 and 40 points when he got there. There was apathy in the building. And he didn't just make Houston a Final Four team. He didn't just make Houston a high seed in the NCAA tournament and a top 25 team. Houston is now a team that's going to the Big 12. Yeah. He's completely changed that program. So, yeah, I asked him about this, a couple of months ago if, he had given a thought. I think he's 66 right now as to when he was going to stop coaching. I, for one, hope he does it for a much longer period of time because I want to see Kelvin Sampson again in the Big 12.
Yeah, and he's 66, but he doesn't act like it in a good way. I say this because when he took his shirt off and was celebrating in the locker room, it looks like he's got 20 more years on him at least right there. I hope he does. I pray for him that. But I feel like we're seeing a lot of the same coaches be successful, which you've seen for a long time, but newer coaches kind of emerge. You mentioned Jim Larinaga before. We've seen Bill Self do it before. Obviously, Kelvin Sampson after last year's run and then this year's even this mini run. If they were to lose to Arizona, he's still proven his success consistently. Jay Wright, obviously, you go down the line. Mark Few is consistent with winning. Even Mark Adams could be stepping into that, and Coach K, obviously.
But never rest.
Yeah, exactly. It seems like we're seeing that. And the Big 12 thing is interesting because I don't think it's next year. I think they'll go in the year after, if that's correct, right?
Yeah. Yes. One more year in the American Conference.
Right. So you're talking about resources. If resources were even, when they go to the Big 12 with the recruiting and the funding that they'll be able to get in the Big 12, Houston's going to be electric. And even next year, with all the guys that they return and a couple of a 5-star and a 4-star recruit they're bringing in, this could be a preseason top 5, top 16 for sure in the country and contend for a national title next year.
I agree with you. And again, I'm going to do, obviously, my 45. I do the Rothstein 45, and I do it every Monday during the season. And I'm going to be ready, obviously, to have that out, but I'm going to be changing it every day because you never know with eligibility what's going to happen this year.
Yeah, that's a good point. Another team I would say is going to be really good next year is Creighton. They're going to have a lot of guys back. You mentioned Ryan Nembhard, the freshman of the year in the Big East, got hurt. Arthur Kaluma seems like he could be a really good breakout candidate next year. He won't be a guy that probably gets drafted this year, but he showed 24 and 12 versus Kansas. He was expanding his 3-ball, his outside shot. So I think Creighton's going to be another team we could watch out for in the Big East.
I agree with you. And I think that if Ed Cooley didn't have the year that he's had where, I think he's been clearly the national coach of the year, I think that Greg McDermott would have been the Big East Coach of the Year. With what he's done, he's been incredible, absolutely incredible.
Yeah, that's fair. And we'll see how these teams go next year, obviously, and the coaching carousel and everything's kind of changing. But on this bracket, we talked about kind of teams that you like to get out of the Final Four. Do you think it is Gonzaga's to lose? I think it is a consensus thing. Do you think Gonzaga wins it? If you had to pick a winner, a national winner, now that we've seen teams play a whole weekend of games, who would you choose?
I'm not going away from Arizona because of Ben Mathurin. I think that Ben Mathurin is the player in the tournament, and I said that before the tournament, and I think, he lived up to it against TCU. And, Arizona, again, here's the thing. I think that's, the two things that's difficult, and we saw it in the TCU game. TCU was good enough to rebound with Arizona and was good enough, obviously, because Arizona is so physically imposing, to be in a situation to negate what they did well. And they were also, I thought, very impressive offensively. They were able to trade blows with them. I don't know if Houston is going to be able to get into the 70s and the 80s with Arizona, because let's face it, you look at the backcourt, you have Jamal Shedd, Kyler Edwards, and Tajay Moore. Houston, to me, is going to have to make this an overwhelming physical challenge for Arizona to get anything near the rim. And again, I said this, Villanova's had obviously the best culture in college basketball for a long time. Houston's 1A. They're 1A, and I've been in their practices. I've been around their program, and talking to their staff after they beat Illinois, they sent a message to me, and they said, look, we won this game in October. We didn't win it today. I think that speaks volumes.
That does. That's actually really interesting. I think a lot of people don't see the insides like that back to October, their trainings and stuff like that, and understand the true cultures. And that ties right back into the same coaches succeed all the time. And we're seeing that Jay Wright is a guy maybe they are under talented compared to a lot of the other teams, but they still won the Big East. They still got a 2 seed, and they're still in the Sweet 16, hopefully going to go further. So would you take Arizona versus Gonzaga in the finals versus Arizona versus someone else?
I'm staying with Arizona Gonzaga. That's what I said at the start of the tournament.
Okay. I think that is probably the matchup that we would all want. The top 2 seeds, we saw it last year. Gonzaga and Baylor are the top 2 seeds in the tournament. But that would be some kind of matchup, some next level West Coast matchup. Big for West Coast basketball, especially after last year with Gonzaga and UCLA making the Final Four, neither of them being able to win the national title. It'd be awesome to see a kind of West Coast. I think Mathurin is awesome as well. I think he's going to be potentially the player of the tournament. I think Koloko has been great as well. But this Houston game is going to be good, like you said. And I think if Houston could keep them to maybe under 70, they have a chance. But it is going to be near impossible. Not impossible, but it's going to be very, very tough to do so. But Kelvin Sampson and the redemption, if anyone's going to do it, could probably
the redemption, the Houston redemption. It spreads.
There you go. It does. Of course it does. Kidding me? But yeah, I think I would roll. It's hard to go against Gonzaga, at least coming out of the top left. I think I want to see Arizona Villanova more than anything. And I think whoever comes out of there, I would book as my national champion. I'll stick with Nova because of the culture and the experience, stuff like that. I've been on Jay Wright for a while. So that's going to be my pick is Nova. But we will see how that South plays out in all the regions, because that is going to be the best one for sure. There's those two, an Elite Eight game.
And again, a lot would have to happen here, but you could have another game. It would be in the Final Four between Villanova and Providence. And then you could also maybe, again, the Duke, you could have Duke, North Carolina. You could have Duke, UCLA. There's a lot of fascinating matchups still left. I mean, you look at it right now, and I think, Miami, Iowa State, and St. Peter's are the only non-heavyweight team that's really remaining. So I think 13 out of the 16 all carry a lot of cachet.
Yeah, and I think that's fair. And I would say that every team on here, not going to say that St. Peter's can't win a national title, but like you said, that there are 13 teams on here that you could very well see playing in the Final Four and for a national title, which I think is awesome. And with all the upsets and contended games like TCU, Arizona, we see that the higher seeds are not that far away from everyone else. And I think everyone is kind of mushed together. So it's going to mold up for a really, really good weekend this weekend, just like last weekend.
Absolutely.
And then you say the Arizona Houston's your favorite game of the weekend. Before we head out, are there any other second and third favorite games you're looking forward to this weekend?
Carolina, UCLA, I think if you're a college basketball fan, is fascinating. Kansas, Providence for sure. I just think there's so much intrigue with, the dream season for Ed Cooley in Providence. Then we've got Duke and Texas Tech. I think those are the ones that I'm really, really looking at.
Yep, I think that's fair. The Duke Texas Tech one is as awesome as it's going to be, and I would imagine that it's going to be Gonzaga coming out. But Arkansas, never doubt the must bust and Eric Musselman. But we shall see. But John, I appreciate you coming on again as always. Hope you have a great weekend watching all the games. Hopefully your picks, your pre-tournament picks, Arizona, Gonzaga, maybe it'll all come true.
I appreciate spending some time with you again, Ryan. 4 important words to remember: we sleep in May.
Yes, sir. That is correct. All right, we'll catch y'all. Appreciate you tuning in.
Thanks, buddy.
See ya.